שמחתי ואומרים לי בית השם ללב.
This past winter, we went on a family trip to Mitzpe Ramon. It's a desert in the desert in the south of Israel. And my husband went on a hike with my two older daughters. And while they were hiking, my daughter Hallel looked down and she saw a pretty rock. She bent down to get it, and when she looked at it, it was very pretty. She turned it around and she saw that there was an interesting design in it. So she gave it to my husband, and my husband said, "This is interesting. It looks like maybe it's a fossil." So my husband held on to it, and when they got back to Mitzpe Ramon, they went to the visitor center, and the secretary there looked at it and she said, "It does look like a fossil." She said, let's keep it here, and I'll give it to the scientists here, and we'll be, if it's something interesting, we'll be in touch with you. So the following week, we were back in Jerusalem at our home, and I got a phone call from Mitzpe Ramon. It was a scientist, and she explained to me that the rock that my daughter had found was in fact a fossil, and it was a sea anemone that was no less than 60 million years old. So when I put down the phone, I felt this great excitement. I couldn't wait to tell everyone and tell my husband and tell all the kids what Hallel had found. But then I found, like, pretty quickly afterwards, my heart started to fall. Because I thought, I in my hand, I had held the fossil too. I had held something like 60 million years old in my hand. And I thought of myself in relationship to 60 million years. And I realized, how long am I going to live on this earth? God willing, I'll live, maybe, 80 years total, or maybe 100 years, 120 years maximum. My life is like a blip. Against 60 million years, my life is so insignificant. It's like a nanosecond against eternity, right? So I feel like it was I realized that finding the fossil, it was sort of a depressing experience. I was thinking about that fossil yesterday because I went on a very, very special tour. There was a tour of the Old City given by Rebbetzin Bracha Slay. She's the author she's a tour guide as well as the author of a book on the Old City called For Thy Sake Jerusalem. And she's an amazing tour guide, and she took us to parts of the Old City that I'd never been to before. She took us to the Muslim Quarter, and what was very exciting is she took us when we were walking down the main street of the Muslim Quarter. She turned off onto this sort of dark alleyway that had mostly closed stores, but like a few run-down stores, like one with children's clothing, one with water pipes. It was really dark, and I was a bit scared. It was the Muslim Quarter. But then at the end of this tunnel, I saw a light. It was a bright light. The light was so bright that I felt like it was sort of like people say that when you die, that you see a bright light and you're drawn to that bright light. That was how I felt. It was like that bright of a light at the end of this dark passageway. So Bracha took us to the end of that passage, and she explained to us that we were standing at the Cotton Gate, Shara Kutna, and we looked up, and in that light, I saw the Temple Mount. I saw the Dome of the Rock, and it was unbelievable. I mean, I never in my life have I stood that close to the Temple Mount. For those of you who haven't been to Jerusalem and don't know, the Kotel, the Western Wall, is down below. It's sort of at the base of the Temple Mount, but you're really quite far from the Temple Mount, right? But if you go a bit further into the Muslim Quarter, you can actually get to see where the temple itself actually stood. You can stand at the place where God's presence is constantly. It's really like it's like being next to God. It's an unbelievable experience. So I stood there. We're not allowed to go actually up to the Temple Mount. So I stood like 2 steps away and just like looked up to where God's presence is. And it was an amazing experience because I at that moment I remembered that fossil, and I remembered that feeling of being nothing, of holding eternity in my hand and feeling what a depressing experience it was to hold that fossil as though I'm nothing. But when I stood there again next to the Temple Mount, I just felt what an uplifting thing it was in that way to be next to this place of eternity, where God's presence rests eternally. And I thought how much in my life I want to be connected with what is eternal. How I want to be connected, with God who exists forever. How I want to be connected with the Torah. The Torah existed, before the world was created, and it will exist, long after I'm gone from the earth. And I realized that I, as a Jewish mother, that I am a link in that eternity. That I am a link by passing on to my children. I'm passing on to them a tradition of eternity. I'm passing on to them, what I inherited from my mother and from my grandmother and great-great-great-great-grandmother, from the matriarchs all the way back to the beginning of time, that I'm passing on the tradition of Torah and knowledge of God to my children, and in that way I'm connecting them to eternity. And in that way, I, in my own little way, am eternal. I thought of this again this morning. I woke up, and the news, of course, was full of reports from the terror attack yesterday in Jerusalem. An Arab, probably a lot of you or most of you heard, an Arab who works on a bulldozer. He decided that he was going to do a terror attack with his bulldozer. So with a gun and with his bulldozer, he turned over buses and cars, and in the end he killed 3 people and severely injured 70 others. One of the killed, may her memory be a blessing, was the mother of a newborn baby. So what they were focusing on this morning on the news was that the hero who killed the terrorist was this 20-year-old kid. He was this 20-year-old guy who was on vacation from the army. And he was enjoying himself. He was taking a bike ride. He was riding his bike to the center of town. And when he saw what was happening, when he saw that there was a terror attack, he got off his bike and started running to the place of what was happening. He started running towards the bulldozer. And he screamed, "Does anyone have a gun?" He got a gun. And he knew that he was risking his life. He knew that in 1 second that the terrorists could kill him too. But he ran up onto the bulldozer and he shot the terrorist 3 times in the head, thereby saving, probably dozens and dozens of people. So when I heard this, I knew that this was the person, this kid, this guy, this hero. He's somebody who's connected with eternity. That he's somebody who, at that moment, he could have kept on, going and having fun and riding his bike and saying, well, why should I get involved? I'm on my break from the army. No. He said at that moment, what he said to himself, what does God want me to do right now? He said to himself, what would the Torah want me to do right now? He says to himself, what can I do for the Jewish people right now? So, nobody none of the papers, of course, are talking about the mother. It's the mother of this 20-year-old hero. But I know that mother, she's a mother who educated her son, that in that moment, in that critical moment, that her son knew what's really important, knew that the fleeting pleasures of life are insignificant, when what you really want to do in your lives, what the most important thing is to be connected with eternity, to be connected with what is truly important, with the Torah, with Hashem, with the Jewish people, with the land of Israel, with the things that are eternal in life. Okay? So I want to bless all of us that we should remember what an incomparable privilege it is for us to be able to give our children the gift of eternity. Chodesh Tov and Shabbat Shalom.